Next up in our discussion of carbohydrates is disaccharides and polysaccharides. Specifically, this video is going to focus mainly on the disaccharides. So the big idea here is that disaccharides are the sugars in our diet. Polysaccharides are the storage form of carbohydrates for both plants and animals, humans, us included. So what do we have here? Well, a picture of potato just to help us think of potato starch. So we've got this potato here just to remind us of potato starch. What's potato starch? Well, it is a polysaccharide. So here is a picture of that starch molecule. And a starch molecule has a bunch of sugar rings connected end to end to end. So here our sugar rings are in a chair conformation. That's just their overall shape that they're being shown in is their preferred or chaired shape. And so it's a 6-membered hexagon just in a special shape. And in place of one of the carbons, we have an oxygen in the ring. So we've got this 6-membered ring in its chair shape with this oxygen in the place of one position in the chair, and then lots of OHs hanging off. And then it's important to note that those rings are held together by what looks like bonds to an oxygen. So one ring is bonded to an oxygen that's connected to the next ring. And then the next ring is connected to an oxygen that connects it to the next ring. So there are these oxygens in the middle connecting one one sugar molecule to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. So we want to look at those linkages here as well. Okay, so I promised we were going to focus on disaccharides first. Just like they sound, the di is for 2 and the saccharide is for sugar. So these are for dimers, essentially, of sugars. So let's look at how they're formed. They are formed by condensation reactions. So they're formed by the condensation of monosaccharides. What sort of monosaccharide could do that? Well, here we have D-glucose. This is actually called alpha D-glucose, so let's talk about why that is. We have 2 alpha D-glucose molecules. So these are shown in their ring form, in their Hayworth conformation, where they're going to be preferred to be in the aqueous form, in water. Okay, so we've got a ring with an oxygen in one spot on the hexagon. And then if we go around to the right, to the next carbon, there's an OH pointed down, and to the next carbon, an OH pointed down, and then to the next carbon, OH up, and then the next carbon, OH down, and then the last carbon has a CH2OH coming off of it. And there's a missing hydrogen, so let's just put that in. Okay, so here's our glucose molecule. Now, how does alpha D-glucose get together with another one? By the way, what makes them the alpha form is that the first OH just to the right of the oxygen in the ring is pointed down. So they are alpha because of this OH pointed down. So alpha has this specific OH down. It's kind of like being that D conformation and having the OH to the right. It's just a specific conformation. Okay, so let's get another color for this condensation. We're going to lose water anyway, so why not? We're going to have loss of water in condensation. Well, where is that water coming from? Well, it can come from the OH pointed down in that D position from one glucose combining with the hydrogen from another glucose. When that happens, the O from the glucose that just lost a hydrogen can bond to the carbon that had the OH. And so that's going to form our new bond from one ring to the next, where the O of one carbon or excuse me, the O of one glucose bonds to the carbon in the ring carbon of the adjacent glucose. And we'll lose the water in the process. So we'll lose the OH off one glucose and an H off of an alcohol on the other glucose. So these two glucose molecules are just, carbon copies of each other side by side. So that, and they each have, these OHs on just about every single carbon in the ring. And so H on one, OH on another, loss of your water for condensation. And what's the product here? This dimer is alpha maltose, or maltose, sorry, alpha maltose. And again, where the carbon of one glucose is bonded to the oxygen of the next one to make maltose, that is actually called our new glycosidic bond, or a new, sometimes it's called a glycosidic linkage. So let's label that as a new glycosidic linkage. And we try to look for those glycosidic linkages. That's, part of our carbohydrate chemistry. Okay, oh, I should have had an arrow here. Okay, so the two glucose molecules get together. They make alpha maltose and water. And giving off water is really characteristic of a condensation reaction. Okay, so that's condensation of glucose and glucose to make a dimer or a disaccharide. Well, here is our most common disaccharide, sucrose, or table sugar. So here we have a disaccharide, and we're going to show how, in the presence of water, it's going to need water to add across it, and an enzyme, and in this case, it's going to be the enzyme sucrase. So sugar needs the enzyme sucrase to actually break this glycosidic linkage or bond and make the two monomers. And the two monomers that sucrose is made up of are glucose, so a six-membered ring where oxygen is one of those members of the ring. And let's not bother drawing all of the OHs in the perfect spot on the hexagon. We're just going to draw a hexagon with oxygen in one of the spots. And then we are just going to draw the OH coming down, because that's going to be the OH we added from water. And then we're going to draw a five-membered ring with oxygen in place of one of the carbons. And we're going to put an O with a new H. And it's really a new H on the five-membered ring and a new OH coming off the six-membered ring that we got from water. So we got the OH and the H that we added. We got those from the water being added across that sucrose in our hydrolysis. Oh, let's label this. So sucrose is undergoing hydrolysis. So sucrose is made up of galactose and, oh, I just said the wrong thing, glucose. Sorry, let's just change that. I want that to be glucose and fructose. Okay, so sucrose, this fun disaccharide, has a six-membered ring bonded to a five-membered ring. The six-membered ring is glucose and the five-membered ring is fructose. And so when it undergoes hydrolysis, we break that glycosidic linkage, we break apart the disaccharide, and we end up with our two monosaccharides. We end up with the monosaccharide glucose plus fructose, and we use the enzyme sucrase. So hydrolysis of sucrose with the enzyme sucrase to make glucose and fructose. Okay, so we've got, kind of the compare and contrast of condensation versus hydrolysis. These are just two reactions that are opposites, right? Condensation is going to take our two monosaccharides, put them together to make a disaccharide. Let's label that. Let's go ahead with that. Condensation takes our two monosaccharides. It's going to give us a disaccharide plus water. And then in the opposite direction, hydrolysis is going to take our disaccharide, use water and an enzyme. So in the case of sucrose, the enzyme is sucrase, and break it up into its two component monosaccharides, which are glucose and fructose. Okay, let's try the next two examples that are really important in everyday life, and that's lactose and maltose. So we're going to look at hydrolysis of both of these. So what about hydrolysis of lactose? Okay, so we're going to add water across it. We can actually write our water as HOH if that helps us kind of see how H is going to add on one side of the molecule and OH is going to add on the other. So we're going to use water. And for lactose, the enzyme is, I bet you could guess it, lactase. So lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. Okay, so this is our enzyme that we're going to use. And we can see that it's composed of two six-membered sugar rings. And so we're going to break it up into those two six-membered sugar rings. And let's just draw a hexagon. Let's put oxygen in one spot in the hexagon. If we wanted to do this perfectly, we would sit there and copy. So in the first one, we'd have an O. And what's coming off of that is going to be oxygen with a new hydrogen. So it gets an OH from water and the H going down. And again, we could copy the whole thing. I mean, next we'd copy an OH going down and an OH going up. We could leave off the hydrogens because they're taking up so much room. And OH going up, the next carbon going up, and then at the last carbon in the ring, CH2OH. So we can try to get it all perfect, or you could just be starting to like abbreviate them as a hexagon with an oxygen in there, just to kind of get the idea. And that one is going to be galactose. So lactose breaks down into galactose, and then it also gives glucose. Glucose we're getting a little more familiar with. So maybe we don't copy the whole thing. Maybe we just copy how the oxygen going down picks up a new hydrogen from water. And so maybe we don't copy the whole thing perfectly. Maybe we just copy a six-membered ring, with an oxygen in it and go ahead and name it. Hey, we should be drawing it all in, but there's our glucose. So the idea here is lactose and disaccharide. We've got these two six-membered rings. It's broken apart by hydrolysis into the two monosaccharides, galactose plus glucose, and by the enzyme lactase. That's the one who does the job. And so our last hydrolysis is going to be of maltose. Maltose, again, we'll get HOH or water added across it by hydrolysis. The enzyme, I bet you could guess it, maltase is the enzyme that's going to break down maltose. What's it going to break it down into? Well, this is actually two glucose molecules. So let's just draw two hexagons with an oxygen in one, opening of that hexagon rather than a carbon. And we don't even have to get all the rest of glucose perfect. We could save copying glucose for another day. But let's just write that we get a new OH on one glucose molecule, and an O on another glucose molecule gets a new hydrogen. So that OH and that H specifically come from water. And again, this is 2 glucose molecules, which if we wanted to, we could copy them down perfectly. We could start going around the glucose molecule being like, okay, from the oxygen, the next OH will be down, and then the next OH will be down, and then the next OH will be up. But that's not super important to me. But since I'm doing it, the next OH is down, picked up a new hydrogen, and finally on the last carbon, we'll have an up CH2OH. I know you can figure out, glucose in general. It's more important that we kind of see the big picture, how hydrolysis takes these disaccharides like lactose, uses an enzyme lactase to break it up into 2 monosaccharides, galactose and glucose. Maltose, when it undergoes hydrolysis by maltase, breaks it up into monosaccharides, 2 molecules of glucose. So let's kind of look at just a summary of what's happening here. Disaccharides, a summary of disaccharides is that disaccharides result from the condensation between 2 sugar monosaccharides. So sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose. Lactose is made up of glucose and galactose. Maltose is made up of glucose and glucose. Then to do the reverse, to do hydrolysis, each one needs an enzyme. So the enzyme required for hydrolysis, or for breaking up these disaccharides, for sucrose, it's sucrase. For lactose, it's lactase. For maltose, it's maltase. Okay, so to make a disaccharide, you condense 2 sugar monosaccharides. Take 2 sugar monosaccharides and make them undergo hydrolysis with water if you use the correct enzyme, which honestly is just the disaccharides ending change to ASE for sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Then you can break them into their component monosaccharide. So condensation to make the disaccharides, hydrolysis to break up the disaccharides. For hydrolysis, use the appropriate enzyme. And that's, in general, our summary of disaccharides.